do 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 do. Close enough. All right. Good day, everybody. Welcome back to the live stream. If you're new to my live stream, this is it. Why do I have no single on the TV? What the fuck is it this time? Ugh. Seriously. Come on, hurry up. Why are you getting no... Oh. I think I found it. I needed to plug it in. Do-do-do-do-do. Alright. Do. So my foot hurts, right? Yeah, must be walking on it too much. Might have sprained it, might have stepped on something. Turns out I stepped, and now it's embedded in my foot, and I don't know how long it has been there. It's been there a few days. Hey, it's cool. That's not the button I wanted. So I don't know if it's gonna come out on its own, or if I'm gonna have to go to outpatient to get my foot snippied. I'm hoping it goes away on its own. Snippy. And there's my echo. Yes, and if you're new to my channel, this is as exciting as it gets. I'll work on a few things tonight. I have 2 of these bases. So, I guess I ran out of fairies, so I'm gonna make 2 more. I need the hot glue gun.
This might be the start of an amazing career. They cast him because he was cheap. He's mind-boggling. Rewind is here. Coming to get you. Connect with your memories. Who the hell am I? Life is just a dream. Rediscover your favorite.
I need to reseal these. Do that too. Da-da-da-da, 22. Hello! Sorry, I'm back. What'd I miss? Something? Anything? Probably nothing important. Come on, you stupid thing. There we go. Glossy's fine. Pizza. Da 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 da. And we'll see what I do with the remote. Oh, come on. I have not left this place. I've not gone 3 feet and I've lost the TV remote. There's found it. Let's see. Let's find something to listen to while we do this. So I used the wrong material for these. So I need a polyurethane base. So that's what we're doing now. And this will be keeping it from being sticky. And we're back down to 4. That was quick. Oh, sure.
You found it then?
Of course I did. Good one. This may be the most important episode of game theory I've ever done. Over the last year or so, I've been noticing an evolution happening within the indie horror space. So today, I wanted to look at why it's happening, where it's going, and what it means for all of these channels going forward. Hello Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the channel that stares into the abyss and asks, "Hey Abyss, you good?" But today, loyal theorists, I have one simple question for you. Why has indie horror gotten so dark? That might seem like a funny question coming from me, the guy who literally talks about dead kids and serial killers at least twice a month, but to me, it feels like over the last year or so, there's been a definitive shift in the indie horror scene. While we're still getting our generic walking simulators with creepy childhood mascots or the 157th version of Ban Ban, we've also seen an influx of horror games that are darker, more twisted, and quite frankly, traumatic. I started noticing this last year when I made a video on one of the most requested franchises from our entire subreddit, Lacy Games. When diving into that series, it became apparent that while this was 1000% a piece of art worth shining a light on, it was also going to need some massive content warnings. After many internal conversations of theorists and many nights tweaking the script, we ended up with a video that I'm really proud of. But after that moment, I started noticing more of these dark indie horror games with actually scary real-world themes being requested. Games like Amor, Bad Parenting, Mouthwashing. It's not just indie horror either. Analog horror here on YouTube has begun to see the same. Things like
Can you see
Inside
anything
Out
from there?
analog horror go to some really dark places. And then, a few weeks ago, I dove back into the Giggleland ARG. The first time around, it felt like more of your typical indie horror affair. This time, it involved one of the characters literally wearing someone else's skin. So afterwards, I took a short break and began to ask myself why. Why does indie horror seem to be getting bleaker and bleaker? How did we get here? And where is it going? So today, I wanted to pull out a little bit and look at the meta of the indie horror scene, to shine a light on why games have been getting so dark, what it means for the future of the genre, and inevitably this channel. Oh, and it's probably worth mentioning, we will be talking about some potentially triggering topics in this video. I will remind you again before we actually talk about the specifics, but just so you know, this is your warning. If you don't want to hear about any of these subjects, you'll totally get it, but please turn back now. For as long as there have been stories, there have been horror stories. Ever since cavemen were gathering around fires, there have been tales of monsters and myths that played on our collective fears. Demons, ghosts, scorned gods, alluring monsters, and curses have always been part of humanity's subconscious. They represent the unknown, danger, inequality, and more. If there has been an anxiety humanity has felt, there has been a monster that's personified that anxiety. In a way, this process makes overcoming our fears easier. Dragons can be slain, ghosts can be warded away. Even when horror stories end in tragedy, the process of verbalizing our fears can teach us how to avoid danger in the first place, or it can help us to process the unavoidable. Because of that, horror has always been an ever-adapting genre and a way to reflect widespread societal emotions that the storyteller and their audience are faced with. When it comes to what is considered modern horror, many historians cite Mary Shelley, writer of Frankenstein, as the modern Prometheus of horror. If you got that joke, congratulations! I hope your high school English teacher is proud of you. Now, to be clear, the lines I'm drawing out today aren't quite as black and white as the title cards might make them out to be. Technically, there were plenty of printed horror stories prior to Frankenstein, like Carl Friedrich Hallert's The Necromancer, or Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto.
You good, Ghetto? I think that was the wind.
And the same will be true of all the eras I'm talking about. What I'm mainly focusing on is the turning point of these eras, the time where we began to see an abundance of these types of stories, and when they began drying up. Frankenstein, for example, quickly became the poster child of the genre because of how it dealt with the apprehensions towards rapidly advancing technology. With scientific advancements, particularly electricity, mankind began playing in the sandbox previously reserved for the gods. So Frankenstein asked if we were equipped to handle the unintended consequence of our ambitions. The next big movement in horror came with the
relatively
dawn
clean.
of filmmaking. In the 1920s and 30s, German expressionists brought about films like Nosferatu and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. These
This
sharp
one might have
and twisted
damage to
horror
it,
pieces
so-
reflected Germany's emotional response to the First World War and the rise of fascism bubbling up within the populace. Likewise, the 40s and 50s produced surrealist films across the globe that evoked the mangled battlefields of World War II. Body horror was popularized during this era, employing a graphic, visceral shock to access that historic, traumatic experience of the war. Atrocities committed across Europe and the severe nuclear devastation in Japan inspired some of the more gruesome and unearthly visuals. And yes, Godzilla. In the 1960s and 70s, supernatural and religious horror reigned supreme, with films like The Exorcist. Set in Washington, D.C. and released during the apex of Nixon's Watergate scandal, which I learned about recently on GT Live, the film was intended as a direct response to the Vietnam War. In addition to the obvious display of protest in the film, there are more subtle suggestions of the period of history influencing the film. The Exorcist ultimately ends in an exhausting, uneasy war between good and evil. Although Reagan lives, Father Marin is forced to jump out a window to his death by the demon that once possessed Reagan. This unsettling conclusion mirrored the general uneasiness felt by the American people when the United States troops pulled out of the Vietnam War. During the 80s and 90s, due to the birth of the 24-hour news cycle, America was forced to become more aware of the horrors that were around them, namely child abduction. A few high-profile cases from that time, like the Greeley case of Janelle Matthews, spurred on what became known as the stranger danger panic. The idea of a serial killer hiding among you, ready to pick off any unsuspecting children who were breaking the rules all by themselves, which, if it wasn't obvious, is the premise of most 80s and 90s slasher flicks, like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Scream.
Twisted Tea fans love the smooth, refreshing taste of Twisted Tea. Made with real good tea with just the right kick of lemon flavor. Twisted Tea. Good times with a twist.
That'll work.
Now, before you guys start telling me that this is an episode that should have been on Film Theory, or before Lee comes breaking down that door accusing me of stealing his stuff, this is about the time where horror games really started to appear on the scene. And they largely followed the same sort of patterns we've been seeing up to this point. You had your traditional spooky characters like Dracula, Frankenstein, and werewolves in Sega's Monster Bash or Castlevania. You also had movie tie-ins for movie franchises like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th, and Halloween, once again sticking to the horror that reflected the reality of the day. And this symbiotic relationship between video games and movies carried on into the late 90s and 2000s. With Y2K drawing near and anxieties about mankind's reliance on technology, horror shifted from slashers to the apocalyptic. With the fear of crumbling infrastructure came the threat of mindless anarchy, aka zombies. So we got a bunch of zombie-focused media with games like the Resident Evil series and the arcade shooter House of the Dead, and movies like 28 Days Later, The Walking Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Shaun of the Dead. Turns out the key to a successful piece of zombie pop culture is just adding of the dead at the end of its title. This
works,
era also
I mean,
introduced us to the world
can't
of
argue with that
Silent
logic.
Hill, which was a huge game, but it fits more into the psychological horror genre that
I don't know if I can adjust the name of this or not.
Every era is perfectly black and white. Silent Hill was just ahead of its time. It wasn't until the 2010s that video games and movies really began to diverge. During this time, there was a shift in how people looked not only at the world, but at themselves. Mental health awareness for things like depression and anxiety began to climb, and there was a huge increase in young people going to therapy. Movies in general began to reflect this with stories like Funny Story and The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which center very explicitly of taking one's own life, during a period where, sadly, the rates of said action skyrocketed. Horror movies did the same thing with Black Swan and Nightcrawler. Psychological horror movies that showed how an ordinary person could devolve into darkness, and the sinister nature of modern-day media culture and consumerist ethics. Initially, gaming followed suit, with smaller-scale survival and psychological horror games like Outlast, Penumbra, and Amnesia finding success. The thing is, though, these games had a problem. While, yes, they were psychological, they were also dark, gritty, and oftentimes quite graphic. This didn't really mesh with the new kid on the block that was beginning to pick up steam as a major player in the media landscape, and more specifically, the video game landscape: YouTube. YouTube was becoming the place to watch gaming content from creators like PewDiePie, Markiplier, and some guy called MatPat. I'm messing, of course, although I actually haven't seen him in a while. He's probably enjoying retirement on the beach somewhere. Anyway, YouTube was just switching up their algorithm to favor watch time over views. And so, the Let's Plays were beginning to blow up. People would tune in from all over the world to see what games were being played, which was big for the industry, but these violent and grotesque looking games weren't sitting right with YouTube's other big priority: advertisers. YouTube was, and still is, an ad-based platform, and so they needed to appeal to the advertisers to keep them spending money on the platform to pay creators. The thing was, these advertisers weren't all that keen on all the blood and violence. They didn't like it in the videos or plastered all over the thumbnails of the site, which opened the door for one indie horror game in particular to slide on in and change the YouTube gaming landscape forever. Come on, you all know it. Say it with me now. Five Nights at Freddy's.
Just sit. It's gonna be fine.
That paved the way for what we now know as mascot horror. This was one of the first times we really saw a second factor come into the creation of horror content. It was no longer about just reflecting society, it was also about fitting in with the medium in which it was being shown. FNAF did still follow a lot of the tropes of psychological horror, revealing the evil in the mundane, destroying our sense of safety and familiarity by perverting the innocent of childhood nostalgia. However, unlike the games that came before, these mascot games were perfectly optimized for YouTube. Instead of violent gore and gritty realness, we now have a bunch of bright, colorful, and simply shaped characters that work great in thumbnails. Even on small scale, you can tell that this is Golden Freddy. You know that this is Huggy Wuggy, and you can see that this is Amanda. They're so recognizable at a glance that anyone scrolling YouTube will know what they're looking at, which not only allows you to play the YouTube game well, but it also plays the advertiser game well. Because at a glance, these characters aren't really all that scary. Their horror is implied based on the incredibly cryptic clues that we have to put together by playing the game, which means advertisers didn't strictly know this was horror at first. It looked like family-friendly content like Chuck E. Cheese or Disney, and even when it became clear that this was horror, because it was getting the views and didn't look like horror, the ad dollars continued rolling in and blew mascot horror into the stratosphere. This led to a decade of gaming full of these kid-friendly mascot horror games. We saw the rise of franchises like Bendy and the Ink Machine, Doki Doki Literature Club, Poppy Playtime, Andy's Apple Farm, Cooking Companions, Amanda the Adventurer, Indigo Park, Piggy, That's Not My Neighbor, Don't Fret, and so many more that it would be impossible to name them all. But sadly, even from the get-go, we began to see the cracks forming in this genre. From broken messes like Hello Neighbor to the internet meme that is Garden of Bam Bam. And those are just the well-known ones. There are hundreds of indie horror games available that just leaned into the same old tropes, the same gameplay, and they felt like they were just thrown together in the hopes of having some of FNAF's success. I actually have a really fun video idea to dive into this side of things. The wrong lessons people took from FNAF's success. But it's too much to talk about here, so if you want to see another video like this one breaking down the things that worked about FNAF and why it's so prevalent today, hit that subscribe button. Appreciate ya. This is where we enter the now, the 2020s. It was time for indie horror to evolve once again, but this time, something was different. And it's here where I'm going to put in your final warning. We are about to cover a number of games with some dark subject matters that might be triggering or traumatic for people. There is no shame in stopping the video here. I totally get it. Please look after yourself and your own mental well-being. If you do want to stay, let's take a look at a recent example that we got so many requests for, mouthwashing. At the heart of its story, we're still exploring the awfulness of the corporate capitalist machine that doesn't give a flying fart about the individual, just like we've seen in a number of mascot horror games. But the way they show that this company doesn't care is where things get really dark. Yes, they do the classic things of leaving the crew stranded without enough supplies. But then we get to Anya and Jimmy's storyline. A storyline about SA, and as a result, a pregnancy, ending with Anya choosing to end her own life rather than stay trapped with Jimmy and carry his child. And the captain, Curly, he does nothing to stop any of it. However, unlike with previous
break some
horror
legs.
games like FNAF, this deep and dark and twisted storyline isn't implied or hidden in secret notes or newspaper clippings. It is front and center to the story. Play the game normally and it is impossible to miss. Bad Parenting is another game we got dozens of requests for. Playing as a boy called Ron, you're introduced to his neglectful parents and messed up childhood, along with a sinister figure named Mr. Redface, who causes his family to suffer. Through each step of the game, it's slowly revealed that Ron is a victim of child neglect at the hands of his alcoholic father, who turns out to be Mr. Redface, named for his drunken violence. Eventually, Ron's dad kills him and shoves his body into a closet. Now, again, on the surface, you may not think a dead child in an indie horror game is all that much for me to make a scene over. We talk about dead kids way too much on this channel as it is. But again, the difference is in its overtness. In FNAF, we never truly see the dead kids or the murders. We're only told about them. And because the scope is so large and the franchise is so weird and sci-fi with its goofy animatronics and soul metal, we don't really feel attached. But here, it's once again the A-plot of the game. There's no avoiding it. And because it focuses on one kid and we see his father do the evil deed firsthand, it forces us to witness it and feel the evil and uncomfortableness. We've even started seeing this evolution bleed out into the more traditional kid-friendly mascot horror games. Poppy Chapter 4 showed us a much darker, more gruesome side with decaying bodies on spikes. And then there's Giggleland with its wearing of people's skin. Now, these themes do reflect modern societal fears. With the 2022 repeal of Roe v. Wade, a legal ruling that eliminated the federal right to abortion based on the right to privacy, it's easy to see why we're seeing stories like mouthwashing. The topic of child endangerment is one that was especially difficult to mitigate during the global lockdown in 2020. Children no longer had access to mandated reporters, teachers, doctors, other family members who are likely to notice that something is amiss and report it to the proper authorities. Even the ideas of cultism and religion in things like Giggleland are part of the same societal fears, from the people who grew up in these environments now trying to deconstruct them and figure out what happened. That all matches with what we've been talking about. Horror media is an ever shape-shifting beast, evolving and morphing to reflect the real-life horrors happening all around us at any given time. But you see the difference from the previous evolutions, right? Rather than this evolution being solely driven by shifts in societal fears, the main driving force is actually the additional elements. YouTube causing the rise of mascot horror has led to an oversaturation of the market. The storylines and jump scares just aren't cutting it anymore. Horror fans have become increasingly desensitized to those classic tropes that used to scare the pants off of them. A simple jump scare in a long spooky hallway? That isn't enough to get your adrenaline pumping once you've played through the same scenarios countless times before. And so, a new element has been added to the equation. Rather than the platform affecting the change, we're seeing a rebellion against the cookie-cutter, low-quality, kid-friendly horror. Moving on to new, more intense horror games to renew your sense of terror. But it hasn't gone backwards to match the previously gruesome and gory psychological horrors of the early 2010s. The vision still felt too vast or fictionalized to really hit home. And so, we're seeing storylines reflecting much heavier topics, the truly unpleasant parts of the human experience, in order to
You found it then?
Of course I did. So that is the history of horror and how we. Does all of this matter? Why have I even brought this up? Well, because as I've said a few times now, more and more of these types of games, we are seeing requests for us to cover them. When we don't cover one of these games, we get a lot of people wondering why we haven't. And so I wanted to set the record straight because the real answer is complicated and nuanced. One of my goals as the host of this channel, and one of our goals at Theorist in general, is to make sure we're telling stories we find interesting and helping to bring some educational value along the way. Stories about these heavier subjects can absolutely fit into those. It's important to make sure we're all educated so we can help those around us. But they can sometimes be difficult to discuss in a way that feels respectful and nuanced for everyone watching. Lacey Games is a good example of this. It tells the story in a fascinating way. The ARG puzzle solving and use of symbolism and interpretation allowed us to shine some light on media literacy and build an interesting episode. The dark and traumatic story elements, of course, were a part of that, but there was more to the story than just that. There was the drama of the in-world developers and their friends. There was the sci-fi, she's in the computer part. There was even a light at the end of the tunnel, a positive message that things could be okay in the end. But Mouthwashing, while it is a fantastic game and it's incredibly thought-provoking, the reason it was thought-provoking is because it was all laid out in front of you. It's the A-plot rather than a secret story. Therefore, to keep everyone on the same page, we would have to talk about it right at the start of the episode. There's no lead-in, no way to soften the blow, and no easy way to give you guys an out if you need one. Plus, if we tried to skirt around the subject, it would feel odd, because it is the focus of the story. So, any lore discussions I could have about it would always come back to that plot line. And to ignore it would be to dismiss the core point of that story. And to top it off, the ending is just as dark. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. That's the point and what makes the story so powerful. But it can also make the entire video I make just as upsetting. And as a creator, that clashes with the responsibility I have to you guys. We're surrounded by real stories of violent crime from every facet.
Not running upstairs.
Twitter, true crime podcasts, news stories, wherever. And it's important to listen to victims' stories and hold space for their trauma. But it's also important to be mindful of how much additional content I am adding to that topic. Sometimes the real world is a dark enough place on its own. It doesn't need me to jump into every dark, disturbing game that crosses the user.
Oh my god.
Especially when there are so many people who have sadly experienced this kind of stuff first.
There we go.
For a lot of people, this show is their safe space, away from all of that awful stuff that they're seeing or experiencing. And I want to respect you guys and take that seriously. I recognize that there are a lot of people that haven't dealt with or are currently dealing with trauma. And so,
Hello.
Hello, Mother.
What's going on, honey?
I'm in the basement, Mother.
Okay, it's about time. How's Scott? Good?
Good. He had another tuna tube and he napped on me for an hour or so.
Okay, just keep feeding.
Yep.
Try to fluff him up a little bit. Seems to be raining a little harder now, but
It does seem. I heard it downstairs, so it must be coming down pretty good.
he said it's supposed to get 30 milliliters, so.
That's a lot of rain.
Anyway, yeah, I'll be in the morning. I'm going to go see you up in the morning.
Okie dokie, Mommy Yummy.
Okay, talk to you tomorrow. Love you.
Love you too.
Night.
Night. That's my mommy.
if I talk about every one of these games as they come out, it means constantly reminding them of that past hurts, making this less of a safe space for them. At the end of the day, we're an entertainment channel built on exploring the physics of Mario, and a lot of our community are younger people. So, talking about real, hardcore trauma isn't what people have come to expect from us. That doesn't mean we will never talk about these stories. As I said, they are important, but when we do, we will always give a warning like we did with Lacey Games. And we likely won't cover them all that often. I mean, just look at the gap between Pet Stop and Lacey Games. And the reason I'm not cutting these out altogether is because I also recognize there's a flip side to this one. Some people want to see stories like this because it shows that they aren't alone in their experiences. For developers, making these games can be a means of self-therapy, helping themselves to process their experience to come out the other side. If that is you, please don't stop making these games. If making a game like this is helpful for you, make it. And if you really want to see us cover one of these darker topics, let us know in the community tab, in the comments, on the subreddit. All I ask is that you bear in mind the things we talked about today. While you may enjoy this type of content, or maybe it helps you process, there may be people in this community who don't want to be subjected to that. I'll keep doing my part too, checking the suggestions and keep weighing up the story we want to tell and how often we want to help to make sure that we represent everyone in this community. The good news is, this discussion, this process we're talking about, it's not something that's going to be forever. Like all eras of horror, this too shall pass. Eventually, we will see mascot horror die off. I don't know exactly when that will be, but it just will. We're already seeing it reach critical mass, so it's only a matter of time until the balloon finally bursts. And when that happens, we may also see the end of this more darker style of media. Because if the traumatic narratives are there to be the antithesis to mascot horror, well then, without mascot horror, you suddenly have no need for these dark, shock-inducing stories. And at that point, we may even see video games moving back into alignment with movies. Right now, the growing fear in society is AI. And unlike the rising fear of the reliance on technology we saw in the 90s, this is about the fear that technology will take over. We're seeing it already with movies like Companion or Megan, and surprisingly in indie horror games like FNAF. I can also see this direction working with the added element of YouTube and social media, because, much like mascot horror, visually it's not overtly gruesome or violent. It's clean and crisp, and allows you to still use some of the tricks for advertisers and platforms like YouTube that we've seen work for mascot horror. But, as time goes on, I also think we'll see another shift. One that will almost be like a resurgence of what we saw in the 20s and 30s. Host of Film Theory Lee told me about a friend's kid he spoke to recently, and how they'd had a nightmare because their friend on the schoolyard had told them that World War III was gonna happen, and they didn't want to die. That is a very real fear being felt by the younger generation due to the political climate across the globe right now. And so, when they grow up and start making games and movies, I can also see us returning to that state of mind. Using more traditional style monsters with special powers and high intellect to represent the people and governments we're perceiving as plunging the world into chaos. Just like we saw in old movies like Nosferatu. Oh, but would you look at that? Maybe this change will happen sooner than I thought.
It is evolving just backwards.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching.
World premiere on Game Theory.
One decision by Scott Cawthon reshaped gaming and YouTube and the entire entertainment world as we know it.
Sorry about that. Come here, girl.
Who are you? Oh, I'm Deadpool. And I guess you're Deadpool too. But in here, everybody calls me Nice Pool.
Oh my goodness, wait till you see Lady Pool. She is gorgeous. She just had a baby too, and can't even tell.
I don't think you're supposed to say that.
That's okay. I identify as a feminist. Right.
Are those gold-plated 50 caliber Desert Eagle pistoleros?
Of course.
Match my ear hubby. Can I have her? Ha! Over my dead body. You're fun. And I guess you've already met Mary Poppins, a.k.a. Dogpool. Careful where you put your hand. She's 90% G-spot, and she'll let you know it. You let this little flirt out of your sight for 1 second, and she starts shopping for a new papa. If you can't be a responsible pet owner, then maybe you don't deserve this little unicorn. Guilty on all charges, Your Honor.
It shan't happen again.
Why are you so nice? It costs nothing to be kind.
McDonald's international favorites are disappearing.
Halt! Das war der Hamburger-Dienst!
First, Germany's Big Rosti. Then Italy's McPizza Bites. up in Canada. Try them all while you can.
Hello Internet, welcome to Game Theory, the show that's not afraid to admit when it's all washed up. On a video game island full of lore, that is. Because I'm finally getting around to talking about the ARG that blew every other ARG I worked on out of the water. We would have probably talked about this sooner, but it came out on January 1st, and we were a little busy here at Theorist. So, after 5 months, I figured it was high time we take a look at the difficult and disturbing game that took the internet
Put
by
this in front of the heat for a minute so
Shipwreck.
it dry.
Now, if this is your first time seeing this game, you might think it's going to be similar to other lost video games we've covered in the past, like Petscop, where we watch found footage of someone else playing the game and see the ARG story unfold before us. But not this time, friends, because this is a game you can actually play for yourselves. That's right, this game puts you in the driver's seat and gives you the opportunity to go around and find the secrets yourself. And there are to find, but to get them, you have to solve some of the toughest puzzles I've ever encountered. And sometimes you even have to fight the most basic of gamer instincts. You have to lose. If you do that, you are rewarded with the thing that we all crave. Lore. Lore about a company fallen on hard times, one man's desperate attempts to save his wife, and one of the most brutal mascot killers the internet has ever seen. This is truly one of the most disturbing and outright horrifying experiences as we go through the puzzles, solutions, and story of Shipwreck 64. Booting up the game, we're immediately given a choice. Well, we can see that there are two versions of this game. One from 2023, which is a recreated version of the original Shipwreck game for the Nintendo 64, and there's a locked version that appears to be that original game, the one that was removed from storage. However, to unlock that version, we need to complete the 2023 version. Here we go. We take on the role of Lucky Beaver and start the game Shipwreck. No surprise there. We are then tasked with finding our crew and rebuilding our boat. The bad news is, you only have 5 days.
There's the small stuff in here I need.
Best get crew.
That's pretty
You'll
stuff.
find your crew one by one, and they'll ask you to complete a mini-game to free them from the island's inhabitants and rejoin the crew. Walter Walrus needs you to platform your way to switches to free your second boat. Just don't move when the lights go out. Olive Otter asks you to collect 30 coconuts within the time limit, and Giovanni Goose needs you to stop the ovens from catching fire. You can also find the chief of the island, Chief Wolf, who gives you a mini-game to rebuild your boat. Each time you play a mini-game, time passes, so be quick about it. You can end the game in one of 4 ways. You can escape the island with or without your crew, or you can choose to stay and you can wait for the clock to run out, killing everyone to explore the volcano. Finding a barge will not only save your crew, but all the inhabitants of the island. However, the ending you choose doesn't really matter, because by getting any ending, you unlock the thing you're really after, the 1997 version of Shipwreck 64. When you start a new game and select this version, you're given a warning that it is not for the faint of heart, and that it's unaltered from its initial release. If that's not an invitation, I don't know what is. This is where the true nature of this game starts to appear, because while on the surface it seems to be the same game, something
Little
is
yellow dot.
about it. There are suddenly locked doors with what appears to be gibberish written on the signs next to them. But we're theorists. Nothing in these games is just gibberish. This is a substitution cipher, but it's not like one that we used in the past.
Plastic.
Essentially, it involves swapping
For
letters
these,
back and
for what
forth
I
to
need.
create a new phrase. A equals B, B equals A, C equals D, D equals C, and so on. Deciphering the 3 signs gives you the
I'll
codes
put some
layer 2,
mushrooms
room
in.
1, layer 2, room 2, and layer 2, room 3.
Flatbacks.
This doesn't
Can't really do too much with them.
But if you stand around for too long trying to figure it out, you'll see there's more wrong with this version of the game than a few misspelled signs.
I wonder if I could put 2 together. I don't think so.
From here,
Yep.
you can go through and play the rest of the
Eat
game
that.
as normal. Win the mini games and get off the island. But where's the fun in that? There are clearly secrets to find. So what do we need to do? Well, it starts by losing. That's right. If you lose each of the mini games, things begin to
No
fall
blue.
apart. Each time you fail, the mini game gets harder and harder to beat. And with each time that happens, we are treated to some disturbing clips that begin to hint at what this game's lore is. Walter's minigame shows us a clip of someone wearing a costume of Bucky, looking down at something with a bunch of squelching pieces in the background. We may not be able to see what's happening, but our minds can pretty much fill in the gaps, especially with an indie horror game. But this isn't the only secret Walter's game is hiding. Near the final square, you're meant to go through this door and then out the other side. But if you instead jump over to the side and then try to re-enter the door from the wrong side, you suddenly find yourself in a long corridor with a button at the end that plays a clip from a man named Mark Mullins.
picking someone's arse is useful to bear in mind, but the most notable thing right now is that he mentioned no one has been acting right lately. Could this be referring to the Bucky we just saw? Maybe Mark noticed Bucky's weird behavior before whatever happened in that Swelchy video. It's hard to say, but Bucky does certainly continue to get more and more unhinged as time goes on. When you get to Olivia's section, it's split into two parts. In the penultimate failed attempt, we can hear an audio recording from a woman titled Olivia's Last Phone Call. Olivia complains about him showing up again, only for Bucky to once again appear, banging to be heard and the audio going quiet. Normally, this is where I'd start theorizing about exactly what's happening here, but Olive's second section does that for us. You're back in the same room, but if you pass 4 off the walls, you'll find Olive face down in the water, a trail of blood behind her, and another Bucky staring down at her. Bucky, this evil Bucky, killed this woman, Olivia, represented by Olive, and dragged her body to the lake. Now, I thought that was pretty dark, but nothing could have prepared me for failing Giovanni Goose's game, because after a couple of failed attempts, Giovanni stops being interactable. You can try, but nothing happens. And then... Sorry, I had to blur a lot of that for YouTube. So, if you were wondering, that is a man having his head bashed against a microwave and dunked in a deep fat fryer by Bucky. It is brutal. Really not what I or anyone expected when playing this game for the first time. Oh my god! So, what on earth is going on? Well, if you break out of bounds through this glitchy wall during the Giovanni minigame, you can find a single oven engulfed in flames. Giovanni Goose laying on top of it. It seems to be a recreation of the gruesome scene we just witnessed, with Giovanni Goose taking the place of the human whose head was shoved in the deep fryer. With these characters being mascot costumes, it's possible the guy we're seeing is actually Giovanni's human performer, and he was brutally murdered by whoever was playing Bucky. This would also confirm that the dead version of Olive we see floating in the river was another recreated scene. And while we don't know what happened to Walter's performer, Bucky standing over him with squelching noises playing, yeah, it doesn't give me the best confidence he's okay. That brutal clip we just saw also gives us a date, 1990. But this game came out in 1997, meaning the company would have had to have covered all of this up for 7 years. Is that why these videos are present in the game? To expose the company that the Steam patch tells us is known as Broadside Studios? But if that's the case, who's trying to expose them and why? For that, we need to go to this weird glitch you can find in the living quarters area after you fail the minigames. Walk into the glitching wall texture and you'll find yourself face to face with Chief Wolf once again. Only it's not Chief Wolf. The name that pops up on screen is Connor. At first I wondered if Connor was another victim of Bucky's, the actor for Chief Wolf, but then I read their dialogue, and it is strange. They talk about polygons working together to create an illusion, and go on to say that who made all of this is Connor the game's developer. It's the only thing that would make sense with this kind of dialogue. And there's been plenty of indie horror games with devs trapped in their own games before. Except, unlike most of those other game devs, Connor doesn't seem to be interested in escaping. They're just admiring their work, like they're proud of it. Gruesome videos and all. Considering how hard this character is to find, I have a feeling this is more like a self-insert NPC, assigned to the player early on from the dev that they're heading in the right direction. Okay, so we have an idea of who did this, but we still don't know why he felt the need to turn against Broadside. So let's keep digging. Remember those locked doors I pointed out earlier? The ones with the sign saying Layer 2, Room 1. Well, once you completely fail each minigame, those locked doors become unlocked and allow you to travel to a deeper second layer of the game.
Something moved.
You found it then?
Of course I did. Good boy.
The game, which I guess explains the Layer 2 thing. Now, I'm not going to run through how to do every little puzzle in each of these next rooms, or for the entirety of this game for that matter. There are so many puzzles that this would be an hour-long video if I were to explain each one step by step. Not every puzzle has lore significance either, and finally, I actually think it's just fun to leave some mystery for you guys so that you can go and play this for yourselves. I promise you, it's well worth it. So, what I do want to do is to explain the primary puzzles that you need to solve to progress, because I have never seen ciphers like this used before, and this won't be the last
last time they get used either. So if you go into Walter's door, you'll eventually come across a room with a number of cabins and an audio player on the wall. It's labeled with code is RXBC, and playing it gives you a string of words. These words are part of the phonetic alphabet: Romeo, X-ray, Bravo, Charlie. And look at that, those words line up with the 4 letters of the code label. But every keypad in the game is a 4-number code, not letters. So how does that work? Well, you have to take the number of times each word is said to get the number for each letter. In this case, Romeo is said 6 times, X-ray twice, Bravo twice, and Charlie 4 times. 6, 2, 2, 4. That will unlock the next part of your path. The second kind of puzzle is found through Olive's door. In one of the rooms is a recorder playing the song Hot Cross Buns. And on the wall, it says code is ECDC. If you explore a little, you'll find another recorder that talks about downloading sheet music, and that is exactly what you have to do here. Look at the sheet music for Hot Cross Buns, count the number of times the notes E, C, and D are used, and bam, that's your code. I told you these ciphers were clever. But it's Giovanni's door that is the most interesting. Inside is a small theatre, which, if you stop and look at the screen, you'll see our 4 mascot friends, except they look nightmarish. I initially wondered if these were monster versions and that maybe this was the Bucky that killed the other 3, but we saw from earlier that the Bucky looked pretty normal when he attacked, so I'm not entirely sure what to make of this right now. Nevertheless, we must carry on to the next room, the red dining hall, and after some puzzles, an art gallery. In the gallery, there is a keypad on the wall that once again requires a 4-number code to unlock. Next to it, you can see banners of 4 colours in order: red, blue, blue, green. And if you paid attention to the room, you'll notice all the paintings are coloured. Some of them have numbers on them. Red is 8, blue is 3, and green is 9. Those numbers remain the same throughout the game, so do take note. But once you get through the hallway, you'll start to hear something.
I like that they're just giving us the boredom.
That is exactly what they're doing, Matt. This audio gives you all the backstory on Broadside Animation that you could possibly need to know. We learn of a man named Rex, an artist that struggled to find success, but eventually, in the 1940s, his first character, a rabbit, suddenly took off, only for him to lose the rights to that character, eventually leading to the creation of Bucky Beaver. If this sounds familiar, it should. It's exactly the same thing as what happened to Walt Disney and Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and the rise of arguably the most famous cartoon character of all time, Mickey Mouse. And just like good old Disney, after a lot of success with this new cast of characters, eventually they would open up a theme park called Studio Grounds. However, this recording offhandedly mentions a previous park that Studio Grounds is based on, one located on an island that you could only travel to by boat. To get to this point in the game, we've traveled through kitchens, dining rooms, beach huts, pools, theaters, all things that would make sense at an island theme park. It's not just the murders that are being recreated inside this game. This whole place is a recreation of that original theme park, Broadside Beach. Beyond the corridor is a museum and a switch. Hit it, and we end up in a new hub room. Solve the puzzles, and we find a computer with a switch that opens up a browser tab showing us a website for a company called Cogware Games. This About Us page tells us about the employees: Elizabeth, Harry, and Connor. Looks like we were right about Connor being the dev of this game. These guys talk about their desire to pursue 3D graphics as well as adult humor and, quote, some edge. Yeah, I think you might have overshot that one, guys. Moving forward though, the tone suddenly shifts. On the walls are drawings of a game of Hangman with most of the name Brandon filling in the spaces. Text warning us to stop, and a drawing of Bucky with his third eye open. Something tells me going down here is going to start connecting a lot of dots for us. We're gonna see things as they really are. And so, in search of that sweet, sweet lore, we continue to venture down into layer 3. Here, the world is dark. We're given a single candle and a tape recorder. On it, someone is describing the death we saw played out with the character Olive back on layer 1. Someone in a Bucky costume dragging a woman to the water and drowning her in the lake, confirming that what we've been seeing in the game are recreations of real-life events. We have to continue on until we reach a computer, and it has a lot to say. The horrors that are to come, the concept of the layers we find ourselves in, and the ciphers we have been solving. The substitution cipher is a language known as Beaver Scratch. The alphabet puzzle is called a Shakespeare cipher, the music puzzle is a Mozart cipher, and the picture puzzle is a Picasso cipher. While this information is certainly useful, I feel like it would have been more useful, a layer ago when I was banging my head against the wall trying to figure out how they worked. But no matter. We're here now, and we must go forth exploring the 3 doors available in order to move on. Technically, you can actually only explore 2 doors, but there are important audio recordings in each one, course, I checked them all out. 2 of them come from Connor, who describes how progress with the game is going, describing areas and characters from Shipwreck 64, and how they're going to be presented to someone called Mark later. Oh, Mark, the guy from that audio tape we heard earlier, the one with the terminally ill partner. If Cogware Games is working on a broadside game, and they're going to be presented to Mark later, that would mean that Mark is likely a higher up at broadside. But based on this 3rd recording we get from Connor, it seems like he's not the easiest guy to work with.
Mark's sold into it, but is that even enough? His service set astronomically high. Plus, you know, the thing I found, I just got shot. I feel so much less safer on that.
Once again, Connor is leaving a breadcrumb trail to reveal to us the truth about what happened and the company behind it all. It seems like Connor found the footage of these deaths.
Yeah, never mind for that.
Witnessing. I mean, I wouldn't feel safe around a guy that lets monsters like this run loose, would you? Yet he also seems to still be willing to work with Mark. He's not acting like he wants to expose the truth he's found. So what changed for him to do so later? Oh, and speaking of monster, this particular room offers us insight into one of the characters we've not been able to identify, Bucky himself. So far, we found the victims, the devs of the game, and Mark, but the serial killer Bucky has revealed a mystery. However, after looking at this wall, I believe we finally have a name. On the wall, we see the words "Who are you?" along with a drawing that will look familiar to those of you who cleared the puzzles in Walter's Waterway. It's a statue of Bucky. There's also 7 letters missing, just like the ones we saw earlier in the hallway.
I think that's all right.
Random is the name of the guy inside the costume, the one that was acting strange and lashed out to his co-stars. This is where the gameplay gets a lot harder, because now we are being attacked by monster versions of the 4 major mascots that we saw in the glitching footage. Turns out these are known as dwellers, and they are horrifying. But regardless of this new threat, we are still on the hunt for lore, and it is everywhere on this floor. If you look at the walls very carefully while you're solving puzzles, you'll find notes from Cogware Games, and these blow a massive part of the broadside backstory wide open. There are dozens of these notes around the level, but after just a couple, you start to get the picture. I was at the offices last night. I had brought a drive with me. It contained our presentation for broadside. I didn't grab the drive on the way out. When I slid my drive into the slot, nothing I included was there, but instead a branching web of folders, the contents of which were repulsive. Many different folders, so many names, so many labels, so many mistakes. It's sickening. Folders dedicated to old cartoons, but not just that, cover-ups too. The little girl was crushed in the squirrel cruise, quite literally, head caught between the track and the boat. I saw the pictures. It's as bad as you think. Oh, it gets worse, so much worse. Not only have guests died, but employees have too. Before Studio Grounds, they owned an entire island, and on that island, at the very least, there were 3 deaths. Connor definitely saw the horrifying footage that we've seen. The 3 employee deaths that happened on an island resort owned by Broadside. The Cogware Games decided to recreate, murders and all. But if you keep going and complete the various Picasso and Mozart ciphers, as well as a few code-based puzzles that are lying around, and then you collect the batteries for the in-game computer, we are actually treated to a zip folder full of at least some of the files that the notes mention. We have 3 folders named Olivia, Nathan, and Gary. Olivia's folder contains Olive's character model, pictures of her as a human and in costume, and the audio recordings we've heard, as well as this note that once again confirms that what we've witnessed in the game is 100% a recreation of what happened that night. By checking Gary's folder, we can also find the footage that we've already seen, as well as the aftermath of his corpse from being dumped in the deep fryer. Gary was Giovanni's actor, which leaves Nathan as Walter's actor, and in his folder we finally see what was missing from the mysterious squelchy clip we heard earlier. Bucky walked over to him and beat him to death with a chair.
Exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it was never going to be good, was it? And yet, the question remains, why give this to us? Why expose Broadside like this? I mean, sure, the company is clearly not a good company, but is that enough motivation? Connor found these files, but still seemed to be willing to work with Mark on this game. This is also an official game after all. Broadside were paying for this, so why risk it? Well, before you finish the plaza, there is one audio recording that shines some light on this, and it's from our friend, Mark.
The entire brand's been going down the drain. The best option we got is to cut the game studio we've hired. I'm going to schedule a meeting with them, and if they don't have exactly what they promised, we cut them off. I'm throwing the exact same amount of money I'm paying for Harley's medical bills into this Game studio!
Broadside was bleeding money, which is unsurprising when you're busy, covering up murders, running TV shows, theme parks, and your own freaking private island. Plus, this person, Harley, seems to be the loved one that Mark mentioned earlier in the audio log, the one that's going to be in hospital for a long time. He's also having to pay for those medical bills. And so, the best plan of action is for him to cut all funding to the video game, or so he thinks. For a small indie studio, losing a deal like this could cause them to completely go under. If that happens, they'd likely want revenge, especially if they happen to stumble across a bunch of files that reveal to them the cover-ups and murders that the company had committed. And once we leave Layer 3, that is exactly what we see play out. Layer 4 to start with is essentially a tech demo, but use the elevator to descend into the sewers and you'll once again face a gamer's worst nightmare. Not scary monsters, no, we love that stuff. Instead, you once again have to lose by getting caught by the dwellers, landing yourself in a jail cell, but also giving yourself access to a new area with some Picasso ciphers and 2 new audio logs from Connor, one titled Devlog Panic and the other Resolution.
Dread, it's done. It's over. I can't even lie to myself on this recording. It went horribly. All bad work, all for nothing. It's only a matter of time till I get their 2-week notices on my desk. Change of plan. Liz has already done everything she needs. Harry's done. Well, enough. I'm taking the reins. I'm completing this on my own. No help, no influence from Broadside, Mark, or any of those disgusting fucks. I was worried about what he'd do to me. By the time I'm done with him, he'll regret the day he first uttered my name.
Connor was blindsided by Mark's decision. He was ready to go in with a full presentation, only to be completely shut down and cut off from the project. Now, he's mad. Mad enough that he's going to make Mark regret everything by outing Broadside's awful practices, by recreating the past, as well as all the murders that took place, and by leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that we've been piecing together of how Broadside
Just need the outside clean, but what do you think?
Anyone that got their hands on this game would be able to figure out what happened, and it would likely mean the end of Mark and Broadside. That could have been where the story ended. A scorned developer taking revenge on a man that ruined his career. However, the game keeps going. There's a demo for a game that you have to download and play to unlock more code, which, can I just say, is insane for an ARG video game. It's one thing to link to web pages and YouTube videos you've been doing throughout this game, but to create essentially a second game just to hide a code, I tip my hat to you, sir. Truly inspired. But thanks to that demo, we now have access to the final layer.
What are the screws?
At this point, we are introduced to a new
what happened to
character,
them?
a character that the game describes as made of wood and cloth, except it can move and even speak.
I was the only one walking downtown. So much. I hope you understand that I need you to find me. If you do what I ask, you'll know everything. Every single detail of what happened.
You are speaking my language, weird statue-looking thing. And so our last task is to find this thing 10 times on the island map. And if we do, we finally get to the end of this game. We're met with a final audio log that shows the meeting between Connor and Mark, where Mark shut down the whole thing, leading Connor to create that earlier audio log and take over the project, to reveal the truth about Broadside. But sadly, his revenge didn't seem to fix anything. We end up in a final tunnel that leads to a balcony. The only option is for us to jump off it. By doing so, we cut to real footage of a real balcony, as well as a statement from Connor Games. Connor took his own life. We get some slides reminding us that when these details inside the game were found, the game was pulled from store shelves. Connor's efforts were once again going to be covered up by Broadside, likely pinned on him as a rogue indie game developer trying to slander their good name, just like we've seen time and time again in other indie franchises.
The majority of them were total fabrications from the mind of a complete lunatic. Lawsuits pending.
And with that, knowing he couldn't do anything to stop them, and with his own reputation destroyed, Connor jumped off the balcony, leaving behind nothing but a broken family, a broken game, and his own personal calling card. An NPC wolf hidden inside the glitches of the game that someone might one day find. And that, my friends, is the sad but incredible story of Shipwreck 64. The story of a studio turned theme park attraction that was responsible for the deaths of dozens of people, only for them to cover up the entire thing to keep their success going. It's a story of a CEO who appeared to be ruled by greed, cutting corners, staging cover-ups, and firing a game studio that was genuinely just trying to make a good product. But it turns out it wasn't greed, it was love. Mark was desperate to save his partner. They needed life-saving care, but as is often the case, the cost was just too much. So he did the only thing he could, cut off the game studio funding, only for them
only an
to
American
reveal to the
problem.
world all the tragedies his company had caused and tried to hide. He tried to stop it, but after all these years, the truth was finally being revealed. In the end, both sides ended up losing. What an incredibly powerful story and an incredible gaming experience. However, while I feel really good about the answers we come to today, I can't help but feel there's more that I'm missing. I know that there's a bunch of posters and audio recordings we didn't get to mention simply due to time, but even still, despite the length of this video and the hours I've spent playing the game, I actually think I've only scratched the surface. We still don't understand why Bucky's actor went on a murder spree. If this game is designed to be a recreation of the real island, then what are the dwellers about? We saw enough pictures of these nightmarish characters, so where did they fit into all of this? And what's the truth behind that weird wooden entity we chased around the island at the end? I know the answers to those questions do exist. However, it's gonna have to wait until next time, because to fully understand them, we're going to have to venture beyond just the game, and into the deep lore that hides in documentaries, demos, and ARGs that are all present on the developer's YouTube channel. So if you are interested in getting those answers, let me know down in the comments. And of course, make sure you're subscribed so that when the video does drop, you don't miss it. In the meantime, friends, remember, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching. And if you're unable to contain your need for ARG puzzle solving until that next episode, why not check out this video where we solve another wacky ARG cool math games. Happy hunting, theorists.
Deadpool and Wolverine. Let's go. Oh, she's coming with us.
Come on. There we go. Took longer than necessary.
You found it then.
Of course I did.
What makes the Chompettes from Cooking Companions different? Why did these 4 kids go on to become these adorable little kawaii vegetables instead of horrifying ghosts like everyone else does in this series? Well, after 3 years, we finally have ourselves a sequel, and with it, another quackpot theory. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that never dreads the weight of lore. And there's a lot weighing on my shoulders today because we are once again exploring the deep world of Slavic folklore with our adorable vegetable friends. That's
I've
right,
heard
we're-
this one. I don't want to hear it again. Find me something new. The end of Etsy. Ooh. Yes, please.
Etsy is dead. What was once the home of bakers selling really cool handmade items has become infested with higher fees, dropshippers, and of course, AI art. But can it be saved, or is this the end of Etsy? Hello, Internet. Welcome to Style Theory, the show that's handmade just for you. Now, speaking of handmade, we have to talk about Etsy. You know, the store that sells everything from handmade friendship bracelets to hand-pressed flowers and just very pretty hand-painted dice. What? I don't have a problem. You have a problem. Now, even if you don't frequent Etsy, you've probably heard some of the tea. Etsy's been, how do I put this? It's been going through a hard time. Back during the pandemic, Etsy was king. Its stock prices soared, and it was every crafter's favorite craft store to sell their stuff. But ever since that time, Etsy has taken a massive tumble. In 2023, Etsy laid off around 11% of its workforce. And just a few months later, a questionable group of investors came in and bought up 13% of the company with the goal of turning things around ASAP. Listen, I don't care if Etsy's big executive dudes get their goal. They'll be fine. But as a lover of art and a crafter myself, I am really concerned about the little guys. You know, the artists, the makers, and of course, the customers. These are the people getting screwed over by Etsy trying to recoup its losses. Etsy's main concern is think of the shareholders. I hate it. This, along with other drastic changes that, yes, we will get to, have led to longtime sellers ditching Etsy for greener pastures. And that sucks, because I loved Etsy. It was a hub of all different types of creatives, all in one easy-to-find place. Over the years, I've purchased a lot from Etsy. I purchased prints, stickers, and yes, a lot of dice, and you've even seen some of it in these videos. But for Etsy to be saved, it's going to have to address the 3 biggest problems on its platform, or die trying. If there's one thing that sellers on Etsy have been the most vocal about, it's problem number 1. The fees! The fees! The fees! I mean, pricing out the core users of your platform is a very bold strategy, Etsy. How's it working? Listen, unless Etsy's executives are planning to learn to embroider pillows anytime soon, it seems like keeping your sellers happy should be your number 1 priority. But hey, maybe me and all of the other thousands of artists on Etsy are wrong. Maybe we are just being dramatic. Maybe these fees really aren't so bad. So, let's review. Before you can start selling your art prints or custom bookbindings over on Etsy, you have to pay their one-time setup fee, which, when I tried it for myself for this episode, came out to $29. Okay, I'll admit that's not too bad. But once your store's up and running,
Mine was free when I started.
Filling that store with, items to sell, right? Well, there's a fee for that. Etsy charges a listing fee of 20 cents per item that you put up in your store. But then, if you actually do sell that item, you are charged that listing fee again. Yes, again, to restock that item. What is this, Amazon? But that's not all. After
The Happy Meal. Loved by parents, adored by kids, and even rumored to be a favorite of kings and queens. The Royal Supper, featuring the Happy Meal.
4 months, if you have not sold that product but you want to keep it available in your store, you have to pay that listing fee again. Ugh. All of this is making me so stressed. I could really use a recharge or something right now. I can help with that. Ah, a monster! I'm not a monster. I'm a mask that's about to change your life. Thanks to our sponsor, Amiro. What is it? I'm so glad you asked. While it may look like something straight out of Silence of the Lambs or Star Trek, the Amiro 5-in-1 LED therapy mask is actually all about giving your skin a spa-level treatment at home. Whether you're dealing with acne or signs of aging, this mask is built to take your skin from drab to fab. Wait, how can it do that? Let me show you by entering the LED zone. Unlike most light treatment masks, which just use one type of light, Amiro uses 5 layers of light to target every part of your skin and give you the best results. If you're suffering from acne, the yellow light will help take away that redness and scarring, while the red and blue light will help with inflammation. Oh, I could definitely use that. Duh, we all could. Skin maintenance is hard, or it was until now. Amiro's mask covers your full face.
Here is the,
evenly and
you
Plus, mirrored interior helps you hit those parts or weak spots, like the corners of your nose. But it looks really scary. Won't that light hurt my eyes or something? Nope. With Amiro's goggle design, your eyes stay protected and the mask stays lifted, keeping it cleaner than other masks. And today, you and the rest of the Style Theory community can get $70 off of your mask, plus free shipping and a 90-day money-back guarantee. All you have to do is go to the link in the description and use code 70STYLE to get yours. Wait, I don't get to keep that one? No, this one is mine. Bye! Well, I guess I better put the link in the description and use code 70STYLE to get one before they're gone. Thanks again, Amiro. But not even a spa treatment is what's about to happen next any less rage-inducing. Etsy's most notorious fee is its transaction fee, which takes 6.5% off every sale. Yikes. And this fee is only going up. When Etsy's first launched back in 2005, there was no fee. But Etsy had to make money somehow. So they quickly instituted a 3.5% transaction fee. And that was the standard for years. Until 2018 when they raised that rate to 5%. And then they raised it again in 2022 to the 6.5% that we have today. As you can imagine, this did not go over well with Etsy sellers. In fact, when that 6.5% fee was announced, thousands of Etsy sellers went on strike and filed petitions to get Etsy to reverse the change. But Etsy didn't budge. And that's not even the end of all the fees. We have currency conversion fees, payment transaction fees. Oh, and don't get me started. Don't even get me started on the shipping fee. Too late. Normally, when you buy something off Etsy, you, the customer, are responsible for paying the shipping costs, which makes sense. Etsy sellers are people, not Amazon. They can't afford to pay the cost of shipping on every order. Except Etsy really wants to be like Senpai Amazon. They strongly encourage sellers to offer free shipping on orders over $35. But who actually pays for that free shipping? Well, the seller could swallow that cost, but for small businesses with thin margins, it's not always possible. Etsy is a true pro and pays for it themselves. Don't make me laugh. Instead, they tell sellers to just raise your prices. In fact, they have a whole web tool devoted to showing sellers how to raise their prices and offer that free shipping, which means that in the end, customers will still pay for shipping, even when it's listed as free. Sure, chat makes total sense. But you know what doesn't make sense? The ads. Yeah, Etsy's ad policy is freaking bonkers. If you're a seller on Etsy, there are two different types of ads you can run to try and reach more customers. On-site Etsy ads and off-site ads. Etsy ads let you pay to have your product be shown at the top of results when customers search for things on Etsy, which, to be fair, is pretty standard for most retail marketplaces nowadays. But Amy, I hear you saying to your screen, an ad isn't a fee. And that is exactly where you're wrong. You see, Etsy's other ad option, you know, the off-site ads that are meant to help show your products to potential customers on other websites, well, they are optional until it's not. If your shop makes more than $10,000 a year, those ads are mandatory. Yep. Whether you like it or not, if you are one of those successful top-tier shops, Etsy is going to force you to run off-site ads. And on top of that, if that ad is actually successful in getting you another sale, then you will be charged, say it with me class, another fee. Yay. Which comes out to 12% off each sale for that top tier shop. And if your shop isn't in that top tier, then that fee is 15%. 15! Yes, and that is on top of all of our other fees. Look at these fees. They can barely fit on screen. Clearly, the fees have it. But that is only strike one against Etsy. Fees aren't Etsy's only problem. Instead, customers and sellers alike have to keep their eyes out for an even more deadly foe, dropshippers. If you're one of the few people who hasn't watched our episodes yet on Temu and Shein, then here's the TLDR of what dropshipping actually is. Dropshipping is a sales model where a store, or seller in this case, doesn't actually keep any of their inventory on hand. Instead, when...
All right. Let these dry overnight.
When a customer puts in an order, that order is sent directly to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer sends the goods directly to the customer. By cutting out the middleman, aka the seller, it allows dropshippers to offer products at much lower price points. Question, am I the only one who feels like that's the opposite of what Etsy is meant to be? Remember that items on Etsy, by their own branding, are meant to have that human touch, which means that things like dropshipping should be against their terms of service, right? Well, maybe, kind of, depending on how you read it. You see, according to Etsy's rules, every everything listed for sale on Etsy must be made, designed, hand-picked, or sourced by you. And that leaves a lot of gray area for people to wildin' out. Technically, the rules don't require an item to be handmade or made by you at all. For example, let's say you make a really cool design to put on some t-shirts. You can then outsource the printing and shipping of those t-shirts to a third party. Technically, this is a form of dropshipping called print on demand. But not only is it a pretty standard practice in the fashion industry, you still made and own that design. You just outsource parts of the process, which is all above board according to Etsy. And when you look a little bit closer at those rules, you may notice the word that I noticed, source. Once again, it's a measure of technicalities. Technically, a dropshipper is sourcing the item that they're selling to you. And technically, by doing that, they are not breaking any of Etsy's rules. I'm starting to use that word. But this trend of dropshipping has led to bigger problems than just flooding searches with endless identical items. It's led sellers to a life of crime. While it's not necessarily hard to get a commercial license to use someone else's design, many people don't want to take the time or the money to do it legally. Art theft on Etsy is rampant, especially among dropshippers. I mean, take a look at this Etsy store with over 250,000 sales. At first glance, it seems like any ordinary store. However, the closer you look, the more things start to look a little bit sus. First off, the sheer variety of the designs. There's a watercolor-inspired hippie band, a 3D-looking shark, and a military boot design thing. I don't personally get the appeal of this one, but then not all art is made for me, and that is okay. But that's not the point. Now, sure, it's possible that this is an artist but it's not likely. In fact, it's just not true. When I did a reverse image search on these, they came back being sold on dozens of other sites, including other Etsy stores. Now, there's a lot of issues around selling stuff that has IPs that you don't own that we don't have time for today. You can actually watch this video right here if you want to learn more about that specifically. However, when it comes to selling things with art that's made by other artists that you don't have permission to sell, well, that was rude. That was rude. My word for it. Etsy themselves also seem to have had their doubts. If you try and look up the seller on Etsy today, they're gone. No, I seriously doubt that a business that was doing over 250,000 sales would just go under. Now, credit where credit's due. It does seem like Etsy is doing something to try and fix this issue. In 2022, Etsy announced that they removed over 1.9 million listings from their various policies, which included a number of dropshipping stores. And by the next year, the number had doubled to 3.8 million. So when it comes to dropshipping, Etsy is kind of at an impasse. Technically, it's not illegal on their site, and they are doing some things to try and fix it. Technically, even if you can still find a lot of very questionable items on their site. Yep, even on Etsy, you can avoid an AI situation. And I don't just mean those AI summaries that every single website seems to be using nowadays, including Etsy. I mean 100% undeniable AI art being sold on Etsy. I know. Etsy's supposed to be the home of the human artist, the handmade items that you can buy from real, actual people. So obviously, AI use has to be against the terms and service of Etsy, right? Etsy has come out and publicly said that selling AI art on their site is A-okay. Completely fair, not a problem. So much for keeping commerce human, right, Etsy? This means that anyone can use an AI image generator to make a picture and then turn around and sell it on Etsy with no issue. You could sell a digital download of that AI-generated image for someone else to print at home and still be well within the rules according to Etsy. Now, to be fair, there are some rules to selling AI-generated art on Etsy, but those rules really just come down to don't break our other rules. No nudity, no AI prompts, no IP thefts, which is already a murky area where AI is concerned. But apparently that doesn't bother Etsy. As long as you disclose in your listing that the thing is AI-generated, then Etsy's like, yeah, okay, sell away. And it's disappointing. It's tag. Like I said at the start of the episode, I used to love getting stuff on Etsy. But at this point, after hearing all of the things that they're doing, I don't know if I want
That works much better. I just need more. When I want to make it, I'm making another teeth cup.
You found it then.
Of course I did.
Don't think the slapping sound is anything naughty.
Lunch or dinner differently at Tim's for their new Supreme Stack. Piled high with sliced seasoned steak and double smoked bacon. It's a sandwich that's built to satisfy.
God damn, handle! Back here.
That use their site to make a living or just share their art with other people. But at the same time, there are still thousands of creative human artists using Etsy to sell their stuff. Heck, I know people in real life who use it because it's the only means of getting their art to other people. And I'd hate to leave all of those artists behind just because Etsy didn't hold up its end of the bargain. So what can we do?
The answer is to figure out how to spot the difference between an artist and a con artist.
First, before you buy anything, check out the seller's store page.
While things like number of sales, age of store, and reviews feel like they should be the best way to gauge authenticity, as we've seen today, just because a store is big doesn't make it human.
But you know where you can look? The About section.
One of the best things about Etsy is that not only are these small creators making really cool things, but they're telling stories. And real human creators love to share their stories about how they got into making art. You'll often find that they'll share photos or videos of the creation process in order to prove that they're making everything by hand.
But if you're still not sure, then take a closer look at the listing itself.
You can easily drag the listing pictures into Google Images. Or if you're on Chrome, it's even easier. Just right-click on one of the listing pictures and select Search with Google Lens. This will search the internet for similar images. And if you find the same item is being sold on other websites, like say Temu or Shein, you might have a reseller on your hands.
And finally, if you're looking at a listing and you just look at it and go, yeah, that really looks like AI, hit that Control F and search for AI on the listing.
Remember, AI is allowed on Etsy, so as long as it's disclosed, there should be no reason why someone would lie about making AI art, right?
It's not a perfect system, but the best thing you can do is trust your gut. If you think a real talented artist made that product, then go ahead and buy it. But if you look at it and still think something smells a little fishy, then feel free to toss that fish back into the ocean of scammers where it came from.
But that does bring us to the question of the day. Is Etsy really dead? While they are taking baby steps to curbing the massive amount of spam listings on their site, it's only a band-aid on a bigger problem. If Etsy wants to survive, it's going to have to make a hard choice.
Support the community that built its platform in the first place, or die a slow, sad death.
Many artists are using TikTok and Instagram to build audiences and directing them not to Etsy, but to their own personal websites. Websites where they can make the rules and keep the profits. And their customers are following them.
It's your move, Etsy, and I hope it's the right one.
But hey, that's just a theory. A style theory. Keep shopping smart. Up next on Style Theory.
Nike has fallen off. Its stock is in the gutter. Its street cred, non-existent. Heck, even Skechers has more aura. So the question is, what happened to Nike?
I wish he touched on like other companies.
International favorites are disappearing. First, Germany's Big Rusty. Then Italy's McPizza Bites. Somehow, they've ended up in Canada. Try them all while you can.
What is the prototype's secret? Ever since the release of Poppy Playtime Chapter 4, this is the question that everyone has been asking. And after several weeks and many whiteboards later, I believe I finally cracked it.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's been clawing at the prototype's door, begging for lore. But today I say, no more! I'm barging through like the juggernaut to reveal to all of you the answer to the biggest mystery of Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. In our previous episodes, we've been putting the prototype under a microscope, looking at where their plan started and how it's going to end. But the thing that I've yet to address is why. Why is the prototype doing all of this? I've actually teased at it a few times in previous episodes, because the game has, as usual, been purposefully coy about the whole thing, simply referring to it as the secrets.
You know I'm still your best shot at cracking that secret.
The trouble is, knowing there is a secret isn't really satisfying in and of itself. No, we theorists need to know what this secret is. Otherwise, we have no way of knowing what the prototype is.
It's rough, but we're getting there.
Why he's willing to work with Harley despite being infamously tortured by him, and why our traitor sidekick Poppy is so important.
Viewer discretion is advised.
I can say that after weeks and weeks of research, digging into parts of the game no one ever expected us to look at, I believe I figured out exactly what the secret is. And it not only answers everything I've already mentioned, but it also, for the third time, gives us an explanation for the prototype's true identity. Fair warning though, this may be my most insane theory to date. Yes, even more than Shadow is a genie. But if you stick with me, I promise you there's method in the madness. So, no more delays. It's finally time for us to learn what
I
this
missed that
Playtime
episode.
secret truly is. We're first told about this secret on one of the VHS tapes called Time. We hear Harley Sawyer and the prototype going back and forth about an experiment they're doing and how Harley is failing to get results.
Your suggestions?
When Harley asks for more resources from the lab, the prototype refuses. When Harley asks for more time, the prototype refuses. Doesn't really sound like you're setting the guy up for success there, 1006. Playtime Co. not offer any managerial training? Now who am I kidding? This is the company that decided flesh-eating toys for children was a good idea. Anyway, while Harley and the prototype are purposefully being obtuse when it comes to saying what the secret is, they do give away a few details in the conversation to give us a head start.
That was so easy.
Is the only one with a chance of helping him with this project, whatever it may be. Harley was the head of special projects and was the brain behind the Bigger Bodies initiative. So for him to be the best shot of figuring out the secret, it's clearly something that needs his genius, likely some kind of scientific experiment. Although it's also clear that this isn't the same kind of experiment he was doing with the Bigger Bodies. Harley has done hundreds of those experiments and been relatively successful, and yet he doesn't know the answer to cracking this secret. That being said, that doesn't mean it isn't somewhat related.
That will give me labs access.
That is out of the question.
Harley isn't allowed in the labs, which Poppy has told us is where the orphans are being kept.
The orphans weren't killed during their electricity. They're below, in the labs. The prototype's home.
The prototype has been portrayed as the guardian of the orphans since the Chapter 3 ARG, and so him not wanting to let Harley be there makes a lot of sense. He doesn't want Harley going back to his old ways and using the kids to middling results. But Harley then talks about not having many test subjects left, which implies that there is some kind of connection between the work Harley was doing for the Bigger Bodies and this secret, like humans are involved somehow. And the final detail we have is that, for some reason, there's a time crunch on figuring out the secrets. This makes me think it once again has something to do with the orphans, who have supposedly been sleeping for 10 years. Maybe they're about to wake up, or maybe they're slowly dying. It's hard to say, but regardless, we have our initial base of options. So this VHS tape isn't the only thing pointing us towards the answer. At the end of the game, we are trapped inside the ventilation system alongside Poppy and Kissing Missy. Harley then calls us on the phone, revealing himself to be the prototype. During this exchange, he doesn't mention the secret specifically, but he does give us a bit more insight into another one of his mysterious motivations, his obsession with Poppy.
That's not true. That will be not when it can mean so much.
The emphasis is on what 1006 and Poppy physically are, and that it can mean a lot for other people. Immediately, my mind went to what we saw from Poppy's cut lines in Chapter 2.
Being able to exist as a dog. As him. So
But if it's just that they are living toys, Harley mostly already figured that out. And why wouldn't he have mentioned Kissy, Huggy, or the hundreds of other toys? No, there's something different about their existence specifically, and we aren't the only ones wondering about what that is. In both Chapter 3 and 4, we learn that 1006 and Poppy are being studied by Harley and his team.
Where'd it go? I mean, eventually it'll find it, though.
He was trying to figure out what made them tick, what made them different, and he wasn't easy to replicate.
Oh well.
He had some success, but there was still more he could learn from them. Almost like he hadn't truly figured out the secret to their existence. And with there being an implication that the secret is in some way related to the experiments going on at Playtime Co., I feel like our answer has to lie with these two characters. So, what do we know about them that's different from every other toy? Honestly, not a lot. The prototype is being kept purposefully mysterious, to the point that we've only ever seen an arm and the shadow of some spider-like legs. The only real details we know about him is that while he's called the prototype, he wasn't truly considered a success by Harley. That honor went to Boxy Boo 154 experiments later.
The first of May. Natural. You have proven my bigger body's initiative a success.
We also know the prototype is incredibly intelligent, something that they actually wanted to repress in future experiments.
Further suppression treatments will need to be enacted to ensure that no other experiments develop these qualities.
And thanks to the background text in the first trailer, we know that he has a digestive tract like all the other toys, but he didn't require food to survive. All of those are interesting details, and Poppy does seem to share some of those characteristics, but I just couldn't figure out a way to connect them back to the secret that is supposed to mean so much more. Instead, let's try turning our attention to Poppy, because while she is arguably just as mysterious as the prototype, there's one big difference between her and all the other toys that stands out like a sore thumb: her creation. All the other experiments were created by Harley from kids who were raised inside the playcare, but Poppy was created from Elliot Ludwig's daughter, who died tragically in the 1960s.
In the 1960s, an unfortunate family death had pushed Ludwig down to his lowest.
She also wasn't created by Harley, but we believe by her own father, Elliot. From what we can tell, his approach seemed vastly different to the approach Harley took during the Bigger Bodies initiative. Harley is a neurosurgeon. We saw his credentials during the Chapter 4 ARG. His specialty is focused around the transferring of the brain, and therefore a person's consciousness, and reactivating it once it's in their new toy body. But the fact that even after thousands of attempts, they still couldn't recreate the perfection of Poppy, it's telling us that the way Harley is doing it isn't correct. So we've had no idea how Elliot actually made Poppy. That is, until now. While I was going back over all the evidence we've gathered over the last year of Poppy Playtime releases, I realized that there was a part of the Chapter 4 ARG I haven't really talked about: the maze. This was right near the end of the ARG, and in it we are shown a bunch of text on screen with hyperlinks that take us to new pages with new text and new hyperlinks. If you managed to get to the end of the maze, you were rewarded with the very important letter about Harley's removal from the Young Geniuses program. But that isn't the part I wanted to focus on. We've already talked about one to death on this channel. Instead, I took a look over the dozens and dozens of different text screens we got as part of the maze. They all appear to be from Harley Sawyer's perspective, usually talking about how you shouldn't be here or I can see you. Some even reflect questions the audience asked Harley during the ARG, like, do you ever look back upon your past in regret? These thoughts, they aren't mine. But as I went through them, there was one in particular that stood out.
One sided.
That's impossible. Severely understated. The organization of older established biological sciences like embryology. How did you get in here? The part of this that caught my attention initially was this word: embryology. Embryology is a branch of animal biology that focuses on the prenatal development of sex cells, fertilization, and, as you may have guessed, embryos. This felt out of place given what we know about Playtime Co.'s experiments. Harley was using pre-existing brains and other vital body parts to create the toys. The science wasn't looking at things on a cellular level or from a developmental standpoint. However, this isn't the only time that this word comes up in the ARG. If you've seen our recent Poppy Bro Gets Timeline short, you may know where I'm going with this.
Hello.
If you haven't, you should probably subscribe.
Sorry,
so
I
you
wasn't
don't miss
looking
out
at the
on
screen.
crucial drops like this. Let's see if you can do it faster than I can summarize this short. Ready? Go! During the ARG, we learned about the now
That's too
infamous
big for
theatre
there.
incident via a zip folder that contained a number of photos of burnt items. Some were toys, one was a theatre projector, but one was a torn-up document. This document contained phrases from Harley cursing Elliot Ludwig for kicking him out of the Young Geniuses program. Though, if you look closely, the document he wrote on wasn't just any old document. It's actually an excerpt from a research paper, Unifying Biology, the Evolutionary Synthesis and Evolutionary Biology.
shaking.
Now, this paper was originally published in 1996, which breaks the timeline every which way from Sunday. But regardless, it is a very interesting read when considering what we've already been talking about.
2 packages.
Time! Did you do it? Did you hit the subscribe button? Oh, you did.
See how many packages it takes to do this.
Anyway, this paper discusses how science has approached evolutionary theories over the years, with the parts we're seeing from the theatre incident referencing how Darwin's natural selection theories and evolution in general were almost entirely abandoned by the scientific community at one point. Scientists at the time wanted to lean away from what they considered natural sciences and focus more on the newer, shinier, experimental sciences like embryology. Oh hey, there it is again. Basically, rather than just observing larger changes over long periods of time, you could do experiments on the cellular level of embryos, observe their development, and potentially alter their evolution through direct environmental factors. And all of this was happening, get this, during the 1930s, exactly when Elliot Ludwig founded Playtime Co. That, along with this being something that Harley had in his possession during his time in the Young Geniuses program, implies that this isn't a coincidence. This was the foundation of Elliot's scientific philosophy. Elliot was always keen on innovating the toy world, making poppies out of biological parts. Just instead of using parts from rats or children, as we've all suspected, it looks like Elliot was trying to continue the expansion of evolutionary science, creating embryos that would develop and evolve into their toy bodies, allowing them to be fully working, functioning, living toys. He could even control their development to mean they wouldn't require food to survive. When Harley brings up embryology, it's because he remembers studying it under Elliot. He knows that it's the only way this could be possible. If Elliot's method is about creating and developing new life from embryos rather than stealing life from someone else, how is the Poppy we know Elliot's daughter? She died in the 1960s, and yet this Poppy knows that Elliot is her father.
I wish you were here, Dad.
In the cut lines from chapter 2, she also seems to be aware of what exactly she is.
Giant's cause. Being able to exist as a dog. It has killed so many people.
And when Harley asks, is it her? He follows up with, that's impossible. He's not referring to just any generic Poppy. Those weren't impossible. They were a dime a dozen, actually. He's referring to this very specific Poppy, Elliot's daughter. Her being alive, conscious, inside a Poppy doll, that should be impossible, even with Elliot's embryological prowess. There has to be a part of this that we're missing, and indeed there is. Because as I looked more and more into embryology, there was one particular expansion in the field that I kept coming across. Cloning. Which I recognize sounds completely insane, but please trust me, this actually ties everything together really nicely.
Put them in nice straight lines, but I don't think I wanted that. Too late now. I'm not taking them all out.
By putting an already developed cell nucleus inside an empty sex cell, like an egg cell. At least this is how we got the first ever cloned animal, Dolly the sheep, back in 1996, the same year that evolutionary paper was published. From there, the cells divide into a viable embryo and then into whatever creature the cell originally came from. Because there's no fertilization, there's no mixing together of different DNA. Instead, it's identical DNA to the original donor. Elliot has mastered embryology and found ways to make embryos develop as he needed to create skeletons, organs, eyes, all within a toy body. So, when his daughter was dying tragically in the 1960s, would it be unreasonable for him to use that knowledge to take her cells and put them into the embryos he was using to make the biological Poppy dolls, forcing it to develop more intelligence and personality so it could actually become his daughter rather than a generic living doll like the others, essentially negating the whole being dead thing. Now, in reality, cloning doesn't really transfer things like memories or personalities. That is known as the resurrection fallacy, and it's a bit of a misconception. Your memories and personality are products of your environment rather than your inherent nature and DNA, which is a whole debate in and of itself
stuff that we're not going to go into today. However, it's possible that Mob is going down the more sci-fi route with this. I mean, we've got kids being turned into toys. What isn't sci-fi about this series? In many a sci-fi franchise, we've seen clones show up with their original memories intact. Heck, even Garten of Banban has been using this trope when it comes to making their mascots out of other people's DNA. This could very well be what's happening in Poppy Playtime, with Elliot's daughter essentially continuing her existence as Poppy rather than this Poppy being an entirely new person just with the same DNA, which is then why she knows about what she is and who her father is. But at the start of all this, I said that the secret had to do with both Poppy and the prototype, and from what we can tell, Elliot didn't make the prototype, Harley did. So all this embryology stuff can't be the secret, right? Well, since I made that initial point, we've realized that Harley not only knew about Elliot's embryology, but was being trained in those same methods, and that he knew exactly what Poppy was. So looking at this...
Do you have any idea how many tooth fairies I had to beat up to get these teeth?
You found it then?
Of course I did. Good boy.
From a logical perspective, which may be rich for this franchise, but we're going to try anyway, if I'm Harley and I'm trying to recreate Poppy, the first thing I would do is attempt to do things how Elliot did them, using the poppy flower and embryology to try and bring to life the first successful bigger body, a creature that evolved to fit and combine with its robotic body. Obviously, it wasn't a total success, which would eventually lead to Harley abandoning Elliot's methodology for his own, making the prototype completely different to the other living experiments, and more similar to Poppy. But if Harley was following Elliot's methodology, that would mean he'd need a donor to make this biological clone from, someone whose life could be worth extending. Well, who better than the main man himself? For a long time, we theorized that 1006 was actually Elliot Ludwig. Both of them were incredibly
Try to see
intelligent.
one package gets me.
For the orphans. Then Elliot was killed and turned into the prototype by Harley and the Playtime co-executives for getting in their way. And during chapter 4, we got these lines from the prototype that had the entire fandom feeling like this had to be the case. In the orientation notebook, PW talks about where Poppy is stored being a version of Elliot's home, where he and Poppy could spend time together. So the prototype telling her to come home felt really poignant. I just couldn't fully get behind it because of one piece of evidence that I pointed out in my first Poppy theory. There's a drawing in Elliot's office that is specifically addressed to Elliot, and with the drawing containing Mummy Longlegs, then this thing had to have been drawn after her creation in 1991. That means he cannot be the prototype, as the Bigger Bodies experiments started in 1990, with experiments like 1188 being made that same year. 1006 comes before that, and so if it was Elliot, he'd have to be dead before this drawing was given to him. Now, I have seen people say that maybe the employees were just delivering stuff to his office despite the fact he was already dead, but the issue I have there is that Elliot's death was incredibly public. We hear people on the radio talking about it in chapter 3. If everyone knew he was dead, then no one was going to address a drawing to him, so he would have to still be alive in 1991, and therefore cannot be the prototype. This was the dilemma I faced for weeks after chapter 4 came out. It felt like so much was pointing towards Elliot being the prototype, but this one piece of evidence just couldn't let me justify it. But with our new ideas around embryology and cloning, we can have our cake and eat it too. Elliot can still be alive in 1991 to receive the drawing and hang it in his office, but he can also become the prototype, with all of his scientific genius, able to build new scientific marvels, his intimate knowledge of Playtime Co. and its systems, and his memories of his daughter being Poppy. However, wouldn't this mean that 1006 already knows the secret? It's just Elliot's method of embryology. If 1006 has all of Elliot's memories, then he could just do it again without any issue. Except there is an issue. The issue is that even Elliot's method wasn't perfect. Remember, there is one more detail about this whole secret that's unaccounted for. They are running out of time.
Time is precisely what we do not have.
If Elliot had figured out the next step of
evolution, developing embryos that would naturally grow to fill the toys, able to use cloning in order that someone could live on as a toy. He'd have still missed out on the one thing that even Harley was trying to avoid.
I am simply a man who escaped incineration and erased.
Cloning isn't without its flaws. Dolly the sheep began developing arthritis in 2001 when she was just 5 years old. Sheep do often get arthritis, but it's usually when they're much closer to the end of their lives, like 10 or 11. Scientists figured out that the cloning process was causing her to age faster, and the numbers would seem to back that up. The sheep Dolly was cloned from was 6 years old at the time of cloning, meaning even though Dolly was a newborn, her cells were technically already 6 years old. All of this meant that at the age of 6, Dolly was actually 12, which is the end of a standard sheep life expectancy. Sure enough, Dolly developed tumors in her lungs at 6 years old, leading to her death. Even if a clone could keep all the memories of its past life, elongating that person's life or bringing them back from the grave, you're only delaying the inevitable. Death will still come for you eventually. That's the thing with life, no one makes it out alive. And I believe we're actually seeing this in Poppy Playtime. Many fans have been quick to point out that in each chapter, Poppy's eyes have begun to change. You could chalk this up to the mob team just getting better as the chapters go on, finessing and improving the designs. But it isn't just that Poppy's design is getting more detailed. Each chapter, Poppy's eyes have become more bloodshot. In chapter 4, almost the entire side of her eye is red, which is way more than we saw in chapter 1, or even in the first Poppy VHS tape. Something has begun to change in Poppy. Her body is beginning to degrade. If she is a clone of Elliot's daughter from the 1960s like we suspect, then she would be 50 years older than the child she was cloned from, likely putting her close to her 60s. The point where humans begin to experience rapid changes in their molecules and microorganisms, which can lead to age-related diseases. And speaking of diseases, Elliot's daughter died tragically in the 1960s. Usually when it's tragic, it's unexpected, which could mean something like a car crash, looking at you, David, but it could also mean a sudden, unexpected illness. And if that was the case, cloning her could mean that this version of Elliot's daughter, Poppy, would be susceptible to the same disease. She could be dying from the same thing she died from the first time. The prototype would also be suffering with this issue. In one of our previous timelines, we've hypothesized that Elliot would have been around 28 in 1930 when he got divorced, because the average age for a man getting married in the 1920s was around 25. By 1990, he would therefore have been 88 years old, which is definitely old, but not old enough that he couldn't feasibly still be working at the factory. However, if he was cloned to make the prototype, that newborn toy would have been 88 to begin with, meaning that by 2005, when the game takes place, while he's only 15 years old physically, his cells are really 103. Again, that is very old, but in 2021, there were nearly 90,000 people living across the US above the age of 100, so it's definitely possible. But if the prototype is aware of this, then he knows he's in the minority, and that he may not be long for this world if he doesn't find a way to perfect the process.
Time is precisely what we have.
That, my friends, is what the secret is. It's not just embryology. It's not just cloning. It's the method to achieve the next stage of evolution. Something that could, quote, mean so much more. Living forever. During the Chapter 4 ARG, Elliot said that scientific progress should always be to benefit humanity. Finding a way to cheat death, to clone yourself and live inside an immortal toy body, avoiding the need for food or rest, also eliminating disease and aging? That sounds like the kind of scientific development that would benefit the entire human race. Harley also said that immortality was his driving force.
Mortality is the curse of the weak, fire that incinerates the flesh.
And after all his time in the Young Geniuses program, I wonder where he got that from. He and Elliot may have had different approaches, but at the end of the day, they were both after the same thing. However, neither of them could figure out how to overcome the inevitable. Age and disease still haunt these quote-unquote immortal bodies. Both the prototype and Poppy are dying, which is why the prototype, Elliot, is in such a rush to figure out the secret. The secret to ridding aging and death from these embryos. The secret of eternal life. To save him, his daughter, and the world from death. And with our player character scientist
scientific background and connection to this company's experiments, I wonder if we might end up being the ones to help him figure it out. If we don't, there may be no way to save Poppy. Although she has betrayed us multiple times, so maybe that's for the best. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching.
Thank you for the thumbs up.
On game theory.
Fan Ban is one big mistake. No, I'm not talking about games. Fan Ban himself is a mistake.
I spend around 10 to 15 hours a week cleaning.
In George's household, have to clean fall on one person.
And in my house, it falls on me. Taking care of all the household chores means I have less time to do the things I love. But did you know?
Alright, I think I'm done for the night. It wasn't my best round, but I mean, I got a couple of things. Alright, thank you for stopping by, saying hi, and I will see you probably tomorrow night, because what else am I going to do with my life? Good night!